The August 26th meeting of the Verona Common Council will begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Next, we'll have the roll call. Ms. Lynch, please.
Alderperson Bear.
Here.
Alderperson Diaz.
Here.
Alderperson Doyle.
Here.
Alderperson McGilvery.
Here.
Alderperson Reekie.
Here.
Alderperson Steiner.
Here.
Alderperson Yurs.
Here.
And Alderperson Manley is absent and excused this evening.
Thank you. We have a quorum, so we will proceed. Next on the agenda, we have public comment. If there's anyone from the public that wishes to speak this evening, if you'd please come forward, there should be a sign-up sheet there. If you would sign in, and then not only for our benefit, but also for the benefit of those watching at home, if you would state your name and address, please.
Thank you, Mayor. I already signed in, so I got that handled. Mike Willett, address is 7715 Midtown Road, which is town of Verona, but I own business property in the city of Verona. So although I don't have an alderman that really represents me, I speak to you all. I'm worried about the course of Verona. Hopefully you are too. But I'm coming probably with something you don't expect tonight. So hopefully you can all forget past things that you might think about me and listen to what I have to say. On Monday, in my mail that I opened at the end of the day, I got my assessment. Many of us have gotten assessments. On Tuesday morning when I got up, I called the assessor because I have some problems with my assessment. I didn't get a return phone call. On Thursday, I called the assessor because I didn't get a return phone call. I left another message. I didn't get a return phone call. Today, I called the assessor, got his machine, called the city and said, I got some questions on my assessment and I really want to know what's going on. And she informed me about the open book that's tomorrow night. I know the procedures. I don't need to be told the procedures. I know how this is supposed to work. I then tried to sign up for the open book, and I was told that's a first come, first serve. So I've been waiting 6 days to get a phone call, and now I can come to a meeting and stand in line. It wasn't high on my list. The assessor did call me back then, which was really nice to hear. Mine is a business assessment, so he informed me that this is a different person than himself, although he's ultimately responsible for it, and that in fact they had all my phone messages, even though they hadn't returned a one, and that they were aware of it and they would get to me in due order. Well, that was really nice to hear. It's too bad it took 6 days. He then told me that the open book, I said, well, I'll come to the open book. He said it probably won't do any good because Mr. Musser may not be at the open book, and since you have a business question, frustration riles. Okay, I have some questions. Business values haven't been very good in Verona. Are you all really comfortable sending a message to the business community that even one assessment can go up 95%? 95%, guys. You have a new valuation method. Do you know what it is? As a business owner, I'm screaming, and I hope somebody's listening. This is not a message that you wish to send to the business community, I hope. So I'd ask for a couple things. I don't ask for anything personal. I will run through the channels as I'm supposed to do. I know how to make that work. I really would like to know, and it was the first question I had for the assessor, what did the business valuation as a total in Verona without new construction do under the new method? There's a number that we need to know. There's a number that the press should be reporting. Y'all need to know that. Is this system flawed? How do you know whether the system's flawed? So I would ask, one, that you find out how much it's went up, because you can look and know if this has gone up 30% under the average, there's something wrong with the new system. Figure it out. If in fact you get the kind of numbers I think you might, then somebody better be questioning the new model. The paper reported a new model. I hope that's the right term. I'm assuming that the paper's got that right. He's not here tonight. I don't know. I would have asked. And the third thing that I would ask, I heard a lot of talk of communicating with citizens. You aren't doing it. You aren't doing it. It's totally unacceptable to wait 6 days for a phone call to be told that I got the message. I don't care if you pull the city's front staff to call and say, I'm sorry, we're really overbooked. We'll get back to you. That's acceptable. 6 days, not acceptable. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Mike. Just, I'll respond very quickly, but I'll keep it short. I think probably the entire council, I don't know, because none of us have discussed the issue of assessments at all, but I'm assuming that we're all aware that the assessments went out. I'm not aware of what anyone else's assessment is other than my own. I haven't talked to anybody about that at all. When people get their assessments, and I understand, Mike, and I can see that you're very upset, there is a process. I mean, we can't change, the council can't change the fact that 6 days have gone on and you didn't have a call. We can't change that. But as far as the process that's in place for the Board of Review to take a look, the open book, and then following that, the Board of Review, and knowing the people on the council, I'm confident that we're going to take a look at that just like we would take a look at anyone else's that has an issue with their assessment. I really can't say more than that, other than I don't know what any other individual in the city, what their new assessment is, whether it's on a residential or if it's on a commercial or business, whatever. I don't know. But, I appreciate you coming forward tonight, and as a city, we certainly will take a look at that.
I appreciate that, John.
Mr. Years?
I don't want to be out of line, and I don't want to take any more time up, but I also want to thank Mr. Willett for coming tonight and showing that we may not be responding in a timely fashion, because I also got a phone call this morning from a constituent of mine who kind of had the same experience. And so I hope that, maybe we can look at how timely of a fashion we can get back to these people, even if it is just a courtesy call to say, hey, we're swamped and we need some more time to respond to your questions. I do think that's a valid concern.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in the public that wishes to speak this evening?
Good evening. My name is Dan Tischendorf. I live at 514 Ashton. I attended the last couple council meetings, and there's a lot of talk about the fire department. We heard from firefighters, we heard from council members, we heard from the president of the PFC, basically all the interested parties, but we didn't hear from just an average citizen of Verona, and that's why I'm here. After hearing all this, I became kind of interested in the whole history of the PFC, and Mr. McGilvray made a statement last week that it was created so that politicians couldn't make influence selections of police and fire departments. And I found that he was absolutely correct. It actually started in Milwaukee in 1885. Apparently things got so bad that the citizens rose up and demanded that something be done, because at the time it was pretty much politicians, mainly the mayor, who would select the police department. They came up with the PFC as a solution. It quickly spread to other cities in Wisconsin. It was actually the first PFC in the country. That was kind of interesting. And then shortly thereafter, the state made it a law. And now we are in 2013, and if I understood everything correctly, it seemed like some council members are trying to determine the makeup of a fire department, much like was done almost 130 years ago. I don't think returning to the cronyism of the 19th century is exactly what we need in the city of Verona. In my humble opinion, there's only one thing that matters on this subject, and that is the safety of every citizen of this city. The staffing of the police and fire department is probably the most important job. It's arguably the most important job that local government has. Lives can be at stake, obviously. If it's your house on fire, you want the best team showing up? Or do you want, we tried our best, we had a hand in it, it's good enough, but what counts is loyalty, not the best team. Your public servants, the key word there is servants. It used to seem like everybody on this council understood that. I would watch from home on Tuesday nights, and That's the impression I got. Lately, I see a lot of arrogance and political ideology, and it just doesn't cut it. You don't represent 4 or 5 firefighters. You don't represent the couple hundred of people who voted for you. When it comes to the safety of every citizen of this city, you represent 11,000 people. I hope you can understand that. You can bicker about downtown businesses, new developments till you're blue in the face. You don't screw around with safety. Citizens of the city pay the taxes to fund the fire department, and we deserve the best department possible. We're dropping $600K on a new truck. I understand there's a study for a new building. The staffing shouldn't be any different. In a perfect world, every one of these firefighters gets rehired. I don't know any of these guys. As far as I know, they're all awesome, and they're all going to get rehired. Doesn't matter to me. The only thing that matters to me is the safety of the city. My family, if my house is on fire, I want the best. It's not my place to make the decision, and it's not yours. There's a state statute, and your disrespect for that process is absolutely reprehensible. If you don't like it, go to the Capitol, get somebody to sponsor a bill, and we can get rid of the PFC. But that's what the law is. Later this evening, any one of you decides you're still going to vote to not fund the open hiring process for the PFC, I think there's a camera back here. I want you to look in that camera. Explain how you are better qualified than the PFC to determine the staffing of our fire department. Explain why you're essentially doing what they did in the 1800s, and which was corrected by the establishment of the PFC over 100 years ago. Thanks.
Thank you for your comments. Is there anyone else from the public that wishes to speak this evening? Anyone else from the public that wishes to speak? Your final opportunity this evening. Anyone else from the public that wishes to speak? Seeing none, we will move on with the agenda. Next order of business is approval of minutes from the August 12th meeting of the Common Council. Those minutes were included with your packet. What is your pleasure?
Move to approve.
We have a motion by Mr. McGilvery. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Yurs. Were there any additions or corrections to the minutes of the previous meeting? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion carried. Under Mayor's business this evening, and I'm going to keep this very short, it was my intent to talk a little bit more about the Verona Library, and that the Verona Library was just named the 2013 Wisconsin Library of the Year, and that's a great honor bestowed on the library, and we appreciate the work of all that the staff does. We appreciate the people, not only citizens of the city of Verona, but we see where people come from to go to the library, and they come from far and wide, and we appreciate those people coming here because they enjoy the library that we have. And then the past elected officials and staff for Verona for having the foresight to do what we've done with the library. That just didn't happen overnight. So we're very proud of that. We have, for the next council meeting, Library Director Brian Simons will come in, and he's going to talk a little bit more about that. So I will leave it at that this evening. So with that, we will move then to the administrator's report. Mr. Burns, please.
Yeah, thank you. I have a few updates this evening. First, as we were just discussing, assessment notices have been mailed. Most properties in the city did receive a notice. This was a full revaluation year, meaning that a new assessment model was put together for all properties in the city that takes into effect changes in conditions in the market in 2011 and 2012. I know the city assessor has received a high level of phone calls with people with questions about the assessment. They're working through responding to those, and I will follow up with the assessor about the concern raised during public comment this evening. Second, the city has taken delivery of the new fire engine. That engine will be available for operation yet this year. It's a city purchased item, so there's a lease agreement that's been drafted that would provide for the Verona Fire District to be able to use that engine through the remainder of this year, defines the insurance requirements, and then that would continue to be available along with the other assets for the city department effective in 2014. Staff is working through the process for our insurance renewal, and the premiums will be reviewed as part of the budget process. The city joined the Cities and Villages Mutual Insurance Company effective in 2013. We received a 2-year quote when we joined Civmec, so we are proceeding with the renewal based on that 2-year quote. There will be an adjustment for changes in staffing and wage levels, as well as the incorporation of the fire department as an additional city function that would be covered under city insurance rather than separate insurance purchased under the Verona Fire District. We've previously discussed looking at impact fee for a potential new fire station and EMS facility. I have a draft needs assessment report from Baker Tilly, who is preparing that analysis for us, and I've sent some revisions that are required in that draft needs assessment. I'm hoping to get the final as soon as possible, potentially in time for our next council meeting, so we'd be able to review that needs assessment. And then the next step in the process, if we want to go forward, would be to schedule a public hearing and then have a public hearing on the proposed impact fee. And then finally, a couple events coming up in the month of September. The Ironman item, which is on our council agenda tonight, would be taking place on Sunday, September 8th. And EPIC's annual user group meeting is September 15th through the 19th. And this year, they're expecting approximately 8,000 customers to be on site in Verona during that week. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions this evening for Mr. Burns? I don't see any. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Yurs.
Actually, Mr. Gunlock, this question may be for you. Will the construction by 151 be completed by the time of the users group, or will there still be things going on?
Should be completed in a week and a half. Hopefully.
It's looking pretty good.
Yeah, they're almost done.
Thank you, Bob. Any additional questions? Seeing none, we will go then to Mr. Gunlock's report. Bob?
Thank you. First project this evening is Cathedral Point Phase 3. Project is substantially complete and building permits are being issued. Next project is Cathedral Point, the Locust Addition. This is a new addition to Cathedral Point that will improve 24 lots in the northwest corner of the subdivision along East Chapel Royal Drive. Construction plans are currently under review with construction scheduled to start in early April or early September. Next project, Lincoln Street culverts and channel improvements. Project is substantially complete with a few minor punch list items of work remaining. Scenic Ridge Phase 5. Sanitary sewer has been completed. Water main on Pinehurst Drive is completed. And water service installation started today. Water main still needs to be installed on Whispering Pines Way, Ashburn Way, and Hidden Valley Road. All of the storm sewer still needs to be installed, as well as the sanitary sewer lift station that'll serve this portion of the subdivision. Construction is scheduled for completion by mid-November. US Highway 18151 off-ramp. The ramp construction, the new ramp has been completed. Traffic was switched over to the new lane while traffic signal modifications are being made to the original lane. New traffic loops are being installed beneath the original lane this week. Then all that remains is installation of the new traffic signals. That work will be ongoing next week and is scheduled for completion by the end of the week. The electrical subcontractor did indicate to the inspector today that they will be done and the signals will be operational by September 6th. So we will meet the UGM meeting. It should be done, open to traffic. They've been landscaping as they're going, so it may not be green out there, but both of the new lanes will be open. Meister Addition Phase 7. All the sanitary sewer and water main has been installed, and the sanitary sewer is tested, and a portion of the water main has been tested. The new box culverts in the drainage way are being installed tomorrow. Crushed aggregate base course has been installed on approximately half of the streets under this phase, and construction of curb and gutter will take place yet this week. All work is scheduled for completion by early September. They're trying to get this open by UGM. It's gonna be close. We'll have to see. They got quite a bit of work to go yet, but we'll see if they've got it paved. If not by UGM, very soon thereafter. And finally, well number 5 in the reservoir. The well and reservoir are online. Well is pumping water. Booster pumps are pumping water into the system. Some punch list items need to be performed before we're totally complete, but that work should happen over the next couple of weeks. So we were aiming to have that well online by UGM, and we've met that. So that finishes my report for this evening. Be happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Are there any questions for Mr. Gunlock this evening? Not seeing any. Bob, thank you.
You're welcome.
We will move then to committee reports. We'll begin with the Finance Committee. Mr. McGilvray.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Under item 9A1, I'll make a motion to approve payment of the monthly bills in the amount of $599,051.29.
We have a motion by Mr. McGilvray. Is there a second? Seconded by Ms. Doyle. Mr. McGilvray?
Thank you. In the way of explanation, 3 of the larger items from this evening's bills. First being the AECom Technical Services, Inc. For engineering service through 8/2 of 2013, $62,741.12. That is primarily for work on the Epic off-ramp and well number 5, which is a TIF 7 expense. Second being to Hammersley Stone for the street rehab pay request. It is a final payment for that street rehab, $211,912.08. And finally, for the purchase of the Salkin property at 102 Park Lane, $147,583.26.
You've heard the explanation of the major expenditures. Are there any questions for the Finance Committee or for city staff? Seeing none, the motion before you is to approve the payment of bills in amount totaling $599,051.29. All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion carried, and the bills have been approved. Mr. McGilvray?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Under item 9A2, I'll make a motion to approve Resolution R-13-033 requesting exemption from the county library tax.
We have a motion by Mr. McGilvray, seconded by Mr. Steiner. Mr. McGilvray?
Thank you. From the administrator's notes that you all received, the city of Verona funds its own library, and because it does, and we exceed the minimum standard established by the Dane County Board, the city may request an exemption from paying the Dane County library tax. In order to maintain this exemption, the city needs to take action each year formally making the request to the Dane County Board. For the 2014 budget, the required appropriation amount is $484,240. The 2013 approved budget includes a total tax levy for the library of $1,172,078, including $623,009 for operations and $549,069 for debt service on the new facility.
You've heard the explanation from Mr. McGilvray. Are there any questions? Again, as Mr. McGilvray pointed out, this is something that we are required to do on an annual basis and submit to Dane County if we're accepting or if we would like to see the exemption from the library tax, county library tax. Seeing no questions, all those in favor of approving Resolution R-13-033 signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, no. And that motion carries. Mr. McGilvray?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Under item 9A3, make a motion to approve Resolution R-13-034 approving revisions to the City of Verona financial management policy.
We have a motion by Mr. McGilvray. Is there a second? Seconded by Ms. Doyle. Mr. McGilvray?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As you know, we've been talking about changing our financial management policy for several months now. From the notes, the City of Verona adopted a financial management policy in 1997. This policy establishes targets and guidelines in the areas of debt management, capital improvement planning, equipment replacement funds, fund balance, and tax rate stability. In June of this year, the council met as a committee of the whole to discuss several concepts related to the policy. On July 8th and August 26th, the Finance Committee met to review the recommended revisions to the policy. The key revisions include increasing the target maximum direct debt per capita from $3,000 to the range of $3,000 to $3,500, increasing the minimum value of items that may be funded by borrowing from $25,000 to $50,000, establishing a goal of funding 50% of the cost of street rehabilitation projects through capital levy, identifying additional desired equipment replacement funds as needed, establishing a general contingency of 0.5% of the general fund expenditure budget, and replacing a target tax rate for debt service and capital levy of $3 per thousand with a targeted maximum debt service levy as a percentage of total non-TIF levy of 35%. If anyone has any additional questions to the policy revisions that were made, I think Bill did an excellent job at the committee level. Ms. Doyle and myself were the only ones present tonight, but we did recommend approval of these policy changes.
You've heard the explanation from Mr. McGilvery. Are there questions for the Finance Committee or staff? As Mr. McGilvery had indicated, there was a policy that was drafted and approved in 1997, and it's been amended 3 times since, so this would be the 4th amendment to the original policy. This is a good thing for us, for the city to have a written policy. It's a good thing to take a look at it on a regular basis and update it as necessary. So has my full support in all the suggested changes as well. Are there any questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor of approving resolution R-13-034 signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. And that motion carries. Mr. McGilvery?
Under item 9A4, we will not be taking any action tonight approving a service agreement with Five Bugles LLC. There were a few revisions yet to be made to the agreement. Bill wanted to work those out, and the committee felt as long as it wasn't holding up the process moving forward and getting a building designed, it would be best to wait.
I don't think any further explanation is needed on that. There was consensus to hold this off until the next meeting. So we'll be back on the next agenda. Mr. McGilvery, is there anything else from Finance?
Oh, thank you.
Thank you very much. Public Safety and Welfare Committee, Mr. Yurs, are you taking this evening? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We have one item on the agenda tonight. I'd like to make a motion to approve an application for a special event permit for Iron Man to be held Sunday, September 8th, 2013 from Ryan Richards of World Triathlon Corporation.
We have a motion by Mr. Yurs. Is there a second? Seconded by Mr. Baer. Mr. Yurs?
Tonight we met with Mr. Richards as well as Sergeant Christensen from the police department. The police have absolutely no concerns with this. It's pretty much the same setup as we had last year. And as Sergeant Christensen said, it's becoming like clockwork. They're having pretty much the same officers at each of the intersections who understand the flow of traffic, and with no concerns from public safety officials, and all the paperwork was turned in a timely fashion, and it's been going on here in Verona for 12 years. It's a great event. I hope we all support it.
Are there any questions for the Public Safety Committee or for city staff? Seeing none, the motion before you is to approve the application for a special event permit for Ironman. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. And that motion carries. Is there anything else from Public Safety and Welfare Committee?
Not this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Yurs. Then we are under old business. We have discussion and possible action regarding authorizing the utilization of funds for the fire department recruitment costs. I would ask if we would just start out, if Mr. Burns, if you would, just provide an update of where we are today, please.
Sure. Yeah, at the last council meeting, there were two items related to the fire department hiring. The first was authorizing the establishment and filling of positions within the city fire department. That was approved. And then the second item was to approve the allocation of funds for the recruitment process, and there was a motion to defer action on that until after the Police and Fire Commission had taken action. Following that meeting, the Police and Fire Commission met on August 14th, and during that meeting, they approved the hiring process for the fire department staff, clarifying that it's their intent to utilize an open recruitment process. They also reviewed and approved position descriptions and authorized the fire chief to begin advertising for the positions, knowing that the issue of cost for advertising was still out there, but authorized the hiring process to proceed through items that did not incur a cost for posting or advertising the positions. So this item is available on the council agenda again for potential action this evening. The amount that's being requested is $4,555. That would be allocated in the city's 2013 budget, which includes both advertising as well as medical and various psychological and background testing evaluations for the full-time positions. And the funding mechanism that was suggested was to utilize funds in the administration professional services account for that expense.
Thank you, Mr. Burns. Questions, comments, or potential action from the council? Mr. Ewers?
First of all, I would just like to state that I did go to the last PFC meeting and was pleased with the amount of discussion that took place. Lots of good questions were asked and answered, and that I found very helpful and very good. There was also discussion which also made our vote to postpone, I think, prudent, in that there was strong discussion that may have changed the numbers that came here. It ended up not happening, but that discussion did take place, so I'm comfortable with the vote that we took at our last meeting. However, at this stage, I am willing to vote to fund the process because I do feel we need to make sure that as we bring city employees in, that the city does its due process and does background checks and medical examinations and things of that nature. So I will be voting to give the PFC the funds.
Thank you, Mr. Ewers. Mr. Bear?
I have a couple of questions. I guess the first one is this the full potential cost? And I have two specific questions, I guess, for staff and maybe for the chief. The first one would be, there's funds available here for 5 tests, 5 medical and drug screenings, and 5 psychological examinations. If there were to be a failed screening or examination, wouldn't we have to come back again and authorize more funds? That's, I guess, the first question. The second question is, how is the chief's time accounted for in this proposal, if at all? Or is it simply he's doing this as the chief of the district? And so I have a question of whether that needs to be included in this motion as well.
Thank you, Mr. Bear. Mr. Burns, do you want to respond?
Yeah, I can attempt to respond to those two questions. In the first item, the $4,555 would be the total amount that's approved at this time. I would defer to the chief and the PFC, but I would anticipate that if there would be a failed examination, they would likely need to evaluate another candidate and would potentially be looking for additional funds for that evaluation. To answer the second question about the chief's time, the city had previously approved the employment of Chief Giver as the city fire chief. He also currently holds the appointment as the fire district fire chief, and part of his employment agreement as the city fire chief includes a monthly stipend that's being paid through the remainder of this year for duties related to the transition of the department, which would include involvement in the hiring process. So that would be part of his current employment agreement as the city fire chief.
Additional questions or comments? Or potential action? Mr. Bear?
So I have one more question. It's a procedural question. What happens if this motion fails? What's the result? Where are we at that point?
Mr. Burns?
The city attorney had provided some clarification on that in response to questions that came up at the last meeting in which he was at attendance. So it would refer people to his comments for a legal answer. My understanding is a practical issue is that if this motion does not pass, that the fire chief and the police and fire commission would not have additional funds to utilize as far as hard costs for their process. And it would be up to them to determine how they would want their process to proceed without those funds.
Thank you.
Additional questions, comments, potential motions? Mr. McGilvray?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. For the sake of discussion and so that we can keep moving forward on this, I'll make a motion to authorize the utilization of funds for fire department recruitment costs.
Second. And Mr. McGilvray, did you want to add the dollar amount in there?
In the amount of $4,555, I believe was the number.
We have a motion by Mr. McGilvray, second by Mr. Steiner. Additional comments, questions? Ms. Doyle?
I'd just like to reiterate my position that I can't vote to fund an open hiring process. I believe the city wouldn't be in this situation if personnel had already been dealt with by management, and I feel like the open hiring process is an attempt to take advantage of the dissolution of the fire district and doesn't address the underlying problem. So we could find ourselves in the same situation even with an entirely different staff. Public safety obviously is my highest priority. I believe that this poorly defined process has already put our community at risk because we have workers who don't know whether or not they're going to have employment, and there's a lot circling around, and I believe that in itself has put the city in a poor position.
Thank you. Additional comments, questions? Mr. Bear?
I also will not support this motion, and I guess I'd like to explain why. And I wasn't able to make the last meeting to make some of these points at that. I had a previously planned vacation. But I sort of respectfully disagree with the chief and the police and fire commission on this process. And my goal is not to get in the way of a state statute. It's simply to disagree on a few issues. And I think that I also don't want to politicize this issue or inject any political ideology. For me, this is about fairness, it's about equity, and it's about cost. And this is not a fair process because there's a potential that a firefighter could lose his or her job without any due process, without just cause. And I do appreciate that the process includes a guarantee of an interview for the current district firefighters. I think that was a good move. I thank the commission and the chief for making that arrangement. In terms of equity, the Police and Fire Commission chose to keep the current chief, to transfer him, promote him from within. I think that was the right decision, and we validated that by giving him a raise. I think we needed to send a strong message to you, Chief, that we support you and want you to have the powers to create the best fire department possible. And I appreciate your comments that you're always trying to do that. That's your single goal. But again, I don't find this process to be equitable. In terms of cost, I think that the costs are higher than what's in front of us, especially if one of these firefighters doesn't keep his or her job. You know, we've invested in training, in some cases for many years. We've invested in many personnel issues, and I think that training a new firefighter comes with additional cost, and I fear that this process could lead to additional legal liabilities for the city. I know there's been some discussions about that, but that's something I'm certainly concerned about, and I think that clearly would come under our purview as elected officials to be concerned about. And finally, I think there were other better options here, and I again respectfully disagree. I think there was the opportunity to transfer or promote from within the firefighters that the district has now, and I think that the choice not to do that is the wrong choice. There were options. We could have done probationary hiring, conditional hiring, but again, I have to respectfully disagree with the process that's been chosen. I think that they deserve the same respect that we gave the chief, and that issue of equity is important to me. So instead, you know, the Chief of Police and Fire Commission have chosen a process that's potentially costly, unfair, inequitable, and I just can't support it. I can't reasonably look a voter in the eye and say that spending this additional money, and knowing of other examples where fire districts have become departments, or departments have become districts where firefighters have been transferred in that process, I still haven't heard adequate justification for doing this. And that doesn't sit well with me, and these issues of fairness, equity, and cost are important ones for us, I think, as elected officials to keep in mind. And the state statute, we wouldn't be having this discussion if the state statutes didn't create a role for us here today. So I think I appreciate the history lesson on how police and fire commissions came to be from the member of the public. And I think it's important that we have those protections in place. But this is simply, at least for me, about fairness, equity, and the money side of this, which I think we do have a very clear role in. So I will be voting no. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bear. Additional comments, questions? Mr. Diaz?
I just want to reiterate some of the points I made from the last meeting. I don't think this is a good use of city money. I think there are other things the city could spend money on and get better bang for our bucks. And of course we are stewards of city money, so we do have to make choices on where stuff gets spent. I would never dictate to the fire chief on an individual level, like, well, you need to keep so-and-so, or so-and-so should get a positive review, because clearly that would be an overstepping of the bounds. I just think that the city fire department should use its review process if there's problems. I kind of look at the fire department, obviously while our relationship with the town is changing, I don't quite see how this is going to be a different fire department, maybe on paper. And I think to get the best fire department, which I think even though some of us disagree, you have to have loyalty to your employees too. People need to be treated right. And if we're going to ask people to rush into burning buildings, I think we owe them at least a fair process. And so I don't think this is a fair process, and I don't think it's a good use of city money. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Diaz. Additional comments, Mr. McGilvray?
I've heard the fair word used several times this evening, unfair and fair. And I have to say, no one has defined for me yet what is unfair about this open hire process. These firefighters who are working for the fire district are going to be treated fairly under the process. I don't understand what it is about what we're talking about doing you find to be unfair. And if someone could be a little more specific about that, that would be helpful for me. I might have some more things to add after that.
Mr. Bear?
It's simple for me. There's the potential through this process that a firefighter could lose his or her job. And if that's the case and it's a public employee, there has to be due process. There has to be just cause. And that for me is fairness. So this process doesn't include that. Someone could lose his or her job simply because we're hiring someone else. And you know, whether that other person is more qualified or not, there was still not any sort of due process involved in that situation, at least in terms of how a public employee should be treated.
Mr. McGilvray?
But you do recognize that is currently the process by which we hire our police. That's how we hire our staff. It is an open hiring process. I think Public Works had, the last time they had somebody who, or they had an opening for a job, I think it was over 80 people applied for that job. There are 80 people who came in and applied for the job. Now I know Public Works isn't the same as a fire, but it certainly is the same as a police officer position. And we're not asking these firefighters to do anything that we wouldn't ask a new police officer. So the fairness and the equity part, I'm having a hard time. If you believe that you want to bring forward the people from the fire district into the fire department, that's fine if you want to say it. But I'm not going to sit here and have someone say that this is unfair. It's completely fair from my way of looking at this.
Mr. Bear?
Well, I think that, and I understand your argument, certainly. I think that this is different because it doesn't seem to me that these are open positions. It seems to me that there are people working as firefighters for this city today. And I think that, you know, in legal terms, it's considered an alter ego in the private sector at least, and I think this also applies to the public sector, where if you're doing a service, have a business one day, change your name and you hire all new employees to do the exact same thing the next day, you've created a legal liability for yourself. And that, when I mentioned in my comments that I think we're creating legal liabilities, is exactly what I mean. We're creating an alter ego for ourselves, and we are getting rid of those employees without due process, without any just cause standards applied. So that strikes me as inherently unfair. So I think we may disagree on the premise of where we're starting, and I think I certainly understand where you're going, but I think we disagree on the premise of who is the employer at what point.
I think if I could, I'm just going to take the second just to caution, I'm not trying to single anyone out on the council. If we look at the agenda, the issue that we're dealing with tonight is the authorizing the utilization of funds for the recruitment costs. We're not talking about the hiring process. We're talking about the utilization of dollars to fund that. So I'm always concerned about open meetings laws and making sure that we follow everything. So I want to point that out. What we're talking about here tonight is whether or not we're approving the utilization of funds. So with that, Mr. McGilvray?
I think you're telling me to be quiet, so I will take your...
I hope I was polite about it, though. Mr. Diaz? Additional questions or comments? Just, Mr. Years?
I would just like to say, although I may agree with some of the arguments being put forth and agree very strongly with them, I do feel bound by the statute, and that I feel that I have to abide by the statute, and I hope that while I vote for this process, I hope certainly that is done with the utmost integrity as you go through this process, and that there's no disrespect on the process on the other side as well.
Thank you, Mr. Years. Just my comments, and typically I keep my comments to the end rather than try and appear that I'm twisting people's arms. But again, I'm just going to speak to the recruitment costs. Many of you know that I've been involved in local government for a long time, over 35 years. And I can tell you that I have never, in that 35 years, seen anyone say that we're not going to provide funding for recruitment costs. I've seen people say that we should try and do it less expensive. We should take a look at, you know, using the internet and use other sources as much as we can. But in 35 years, not only here in the city of Verona, not only in Manitowoc County where I came from before that, but I work with local units of government statewide. In 35 years, I have never heard someone say that we're not going to pay anything towards recruitment costs. So I think that we get judged, elected officials, by the job that we do and whether we're reasonable or not. Someone told me that over the weekend. That's what you should think about being, whether you're not you're considered a reasonable person. It doesn't matter if we agree or we disagree, but we need to be reasonable. And I think the reasonable thing here to do is to fund the recruitment. We're not holding anyone else, any other department. We've never done it in the past. If that's what we want to start doing, then I think we need to do it for any other recruitment that we do down the road, and just want to keep that in mind. I like the idea of being frugal. I like people talking about that. They're concerned about spending money, and hopefully we'll carry that through when we deal with the 2014 budget. I hope that that's the case. But I think we're being unreasonable here as a city if we're saying that we're not going to fund any of the recruitment costs. So, any additional comments, questions? Ms. Reiki?
I just, I don't know if this is the time to make a motion to defer this yet again. Can I do that at this time? And I'll explain.
There could be a motion to defer.
Okay, because I see that our city attorney is not present tonight, and I am a little worried about this alter ego notion of, you know, why we're transferring from a district to a city fire department in the first place. I guess I could use a little history lesson on that, but I'm just concerned that we I don't think we should take this vote until we have our city attorney determine whether or not this is actually forming a new department, a new employer, or not. Because I think from the citizens I've heard from, almost all of them are concerned about their safety and well-being if this department is in flux and turning over. And so I think if I'm listening to my constituents who voted for me, I really think that it would be best to defer this yet again until we've heard from the attorney on that alter ego issue that Mike was referring to.
Second.
So we have a motion and a second to defer, and you want to defer it to the next meeting, is that?
Well, defer it until after the city attorney has had a chance to research that and completely answer that question.
Okay, we have a motion, we have a second by Mr. Diaz. Ms. Doyle?
Yeah, I was just going to say, to add to the idea of the alter ego, I mean, if you think about it from, and again, this is kind of delving into the private sector, but you essentially have a majority shareholder buying out a minority shareholder, and that's where this all comes into play. And that could open the city up for more potential litigation throughout the process, if that's in fact what it is.
We have a motion and a second. I can't help but make this comment. Here, we're all worried about, Mr. Diaz did second the motion, correct? Okay. We're talking about costs of recruitment, but no one's saying anything about the legal costs that we're dealing with every time we have an attorney is taking a look at something. If we think that all our legal counsel comes free to the city, we've got another guest coming. I like our attorney. I like Brian Kleinmeyer a lot. I think he does a great job. What about the legal costs that we're talking about here? It seems really ridiculous to me that we're saying on one hand we're not going to advertise, but on the other hand we're willing to pay additional legal costs. I just can't help but make that comment. Again, I think we're not being reasonable. Ms. Doyle?
I think lawsuits against the city for wrongful hiring process, and if they do in fact find that it is an alter ego situation, that's going to be more costly than consulting an attorney.
Mr. Bear?
And I think this is a question that we haven't had our attorney address as of yet, and I think it's an important one. Avoiding spending a little to prevent potentially a lot, as Ms. Doyle is saying, I think is important. And I also just want to say, back to the previous comment about frugality, that this isn't for me just about frugality, it's about the merits of the costs. And I think that talking about the merits of the costs are in order. So thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Mayor,
Mr. McGilvray?
you may tell me no when I'm done that this is off topic, but I'm struck by the one side of the legal issue that you all seem to be worried about, but you're ignoring the flip side, which is the whole point of the open and hiring process is to make sure that the city staff has gone through due process to make sure that they have the best people they can have representing us in our fire and safety. I'm not saying these people who are sitting here right now aren't the best people. But what I'm telling you is, if we don't have an open hiring process and we just transfer people in from a pre-existing body and something goes wrong, how do you think that that kind of liability is any less important than the liability you're saying you're putting us in the possibility of having for a wrongful hiring process? The whole point of the open hire process is that people go through it. Now, you can disagree with me that you think that that's unfair, but the truth of the matter is that's why we have the process. I'm speaking more to Mr. Barrett, because we've kind of had a conversation going here.
Mr. Diaz?
This is just a general question, but how much does it typically cost to consult with the city attorney?
We have an hourly rate. Mr. Burns, do you know what that is offhand?
Should know off the top of my head, but I will find that number for you.
Are there any other, Mr. Bear, we'll come back to that, Mr. Diaz.
Sure, if I
Mr.
could
Bear?
respond to the to Mr. McGilvray while Bill's finding that information for us. I would be happy to support some recruitment costs, and I think the city does need to insulate itself, as you're saying, and I've been clear about that from the beginning. I discussed that issue at the committee of the whole meeting, that I think we do obviously need to do some screening to ensure that anyone who becomes a city employee is qualified to do so, is certified and licensed to be a firefighter, and passes whatever exams we or the chief think is necessary. But that's what I would be willing to support, not the open process that creates potential legal liabilities, is unfair, inequitable, and costly otherwise.
Thank you, Mr. Bear. Mr. Burns, if you would, please.
Yeah, our current rates are for a partner, which would include Brian Kleinmeyer, $170 an hour; for associates, $160 an hour; and paralegals, $105 per hour. $105 per hour for paralegal.
Additional questions or comments? And again, this is on the motion to defer. Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor of deferring until after the attorney has the opportunity to review that issue? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no?
Nay.
Can we have a show of hands on the noes? 1, 2, we have 3 noes, so the motion to defer passes. So that concludes old business. We are on to new business. Is there any new business this evening? Not seeing any. Are there any announcements this evening? Are there any? We cannot take any announcements from the public. Mr. Steiner?
Thanks, Mayor. School's starting, and our crossing guards are going to be training our children to cross the streets under their direction. So please have a little chat with your child, if he's a bike rider or a walker, to listen to the crossing guard. We have 3 major highways that our children have to cross to get to school, and that begins right after Labor Day, and I wish everyone to have a safe school year. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Steiner. Additional announcements this evening, Mr. Bear, and then Ms. Reekie.
Sorry, jumped in front of Heather. I just want to thank Officer Kyle and Chief Coughlin. I went on a ride along with the police department with Officer Kyle last week, Tuesday, and had a very good experience, good learning experience for me, and I appreciate his time and indulging me in all of my many questions and wonky details. So I appreciate his time, and it was and appreciate the chief also for setting it up. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bear. Ms. Reekie?
I just wanted to thank everyone who came to my listening sessions earlier in August, and also just let people know that if they weren't able to attend and would like to take a survey, I did send that out to the people whose email addresses I have. And if you'd like to get on that email list, please email or call me. My info's on the website and in the phone book. And I would love for as many people as possible to take the survey. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Reekie. Any additional announcements? Seeing none, a motion to adjourn would be in order.
So moved.
We have a motion by Mr. Yurs. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Ms. Reekie. All those in favor of adjournment signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion carried, and we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.